I am Dr. Ramon Harvey. I'm the Aziz Foundation Lecturer in Islamic Studies at Cambridge Muslim College. My recent book is Transcendent God, Rational World, a Maturidi Theology, published by Edinburgh University Press. So this book that I've written, Transcendent God, Rational World, it's a work of contemporary theology. We could call it Kalam Jadid, renewed Kalam. This is a constructive work of Islamic theology, but it builds substantially on classical materials of the Maturidi school. In particular, the founder of the Maturidi school of Kalam, Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, was a Hanafi scholar from Samarkand who lived in the 4th or 10th century. And he had a quite original way of thinking theologically and drew together various diverse sources to present his theology. And so I study his system in some detail and try to reconstruct what he was doing theologically. And then I move on from that to also look at later representatives of his tradition and ultimately at the contemporary period of philosophy and theology. And so the book as a whole, after some of this introductory and sort of methodological areas, really starts to consider the beginnings of a systematic theology covering topics such as epistemology, ontology and metaphysics, natural theology, so arguments for the existence of God, and then going into distinct attributes of God, so the divine nature, omniscience and wisdom, creative action, and also divine speech in the Quran. So it takes the kind of narrative up until, or the exposition up until the end of discussion of the divine attributes, of a kind of what you'd see in a theology manual. But all the way through, there's these three elements of analysis of al-Maturidi's own position, the refinements, developments, and adjustments that come with the Maturidi tradition, particularly the early and classical tradition, and then sort of a very creative attempt to put this in conversation with contemporary thought. And here, there's a couple of areas that are important. One is analytic theology, analytic philosophy, and that particularly draws on the Christian tradition in the contemporary Christian thought in that area. And then also I take quite a lot from the phenomenology of Edmund Husserl and some of his ideas, which I find quite productive in sort of developing my own perspective. So that's the kind of main approach of the book. So I came to write this book because I had become increasingly interested in Islamic theology, and I wanted also to work on a theology that was grounded in the earlier tradition of Kalam in some sense. And I had an interest in the Maturidi school, and this actually can already be seen in my previous book, The Quran and the Just Society, which, although it's on the subject of the Quran, I do, get into some of these theological questions and have some interest in the Maturidi perspective already there. And so I wanted to write this kind of work, and I noticed that really the area of a kind of contemporary philosophical theology hadn't really been fully realized within the academy. You often get works that deal with the history of theology, and these important works of intellectual history, and you sometimes get some more contemporary treatments of particular questions, or maybe of a kind of more scriptural theology, drawing theological principles from the Quran and so on. But I didn't really feel that in many cases there was a strong attempt to look seriously at the Islamic tradition and go back to the primary sources of whatever part of that tradition, and then to really take this into a serious conversation with contemporary thought. And I felt that I would be able to bring the two elements together in a way that was really quite interesting, and had something for historians, had something for students of contemporary theology, and also those who, like myself, do have interests in both areas. So I became very interested in this project and went away and produced this book, and I've been quite happy with the reception that it's been getting so far. Going forward, I do have plans to write a follow-up of a kind for the Transcendent God, Rational World. As I mentioned, this book concludes talking about the divine nature and attributes, but there's a whole other dimension to theology and to works of kalam, where the focus then shifts to the human being, to the nature of the human being, to the question of prophecy and the sending of prophets, to things like human action, sin and faith, also the very famous and difficult problem of reconciling human free will with divine omniscience or predestination, depending on the perspective taken there. And then there's other questions as well that may come into the latter parts of theology manuals, including political theology as well. And so I found that these areas to be quite interesting, and I wanted to build an earlier foundation, which I feel I've done with this book. And so I would like to kind of continue this similar methodology, but to work on some of these problems of theological anthropology. And I'm making notes for that. It's still at an early stage, but I do hope to work on that in the near future.